every July, millions of people around the world tune in to watch the Tour de France. And after the first 3 minutes or so, the casual or new viewer might be asking questions such as, why are they riding so slowly? Why are they happy for that one guy to go flying up the road and they're not chasing him? And most importantly, why is the guy in yellow not trying to win today? Well, if that's you, don't worry, I've got you covered with this video. Good morning and welcome to a beautifully sunny Sunday morning ride. And it's not only beautiful because of the weather this morning, it's extra beautiful because the Tour de France started yesterday in Barcelona. Yeah, Tour de France in Barcelona. I'll explain that one in a minute. But given that the Tour de France has just started and that it can be a little bit confusing for the new or casual viewer, I thought I'd give you a rundown of exactly how to watch it, how to enjoy it, and how to get the most out of it. The first confusing thing to discuss is probably the fact that, as I just mentioned, it's starting in Barcelona this year, which is very much Spain, not France. And the reason for that is every year it usually starts in a country other than France. The first 3 stages, known as the Grand Depart, are put on in another country somewhere to try and broaden the appeal and the viewership of the race. Last year it actually did start in France, but this year, as I say, it's Spain, and next year I'm very excited because it's starting in the UK. Cannot wait for that. But yeah, the Grand Depart, first 3 stages, usually in another country. Well, it's not actually a single race. It's 21 races for the men, or 9 for the ladies, and it covers around 3,300 kilometres or 1,200 kilometres for the men or the women. Imagine it like 21 or 9 marathons, back to back, every single day, with only a couple of rest days for the men and none for the women, across mountains, and usually in searing heat. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, that's quite a few decent Sunday social rides. Well, honestly, this is the bit that probably confuses most first-time and casual viewers the most, because it's not actually the person who wins the most stages that wins the overall race. It's the person who completes the entire thing in the lowest total time. After every stage, every rider's time gets accumulated with all the previous stages, and the person with the lowest time overall gets to wear the yellow jersey. More on the jerseys later. The person in the yellow jersey every day is the current leader on the general classification leaderboard, otherwise known as GC. And that's how you can have a rider who wins 6 or 7 stages in the Tour but doesn't win it overall, but then another rider who quietly sits in the pack and finishes near the front every day gets to wear the yellow jersey. Let's move on to the yellow jersey, or to give it its French name, the maillot jaune. This is the one that everyone recognises and that everyone wants to wear. As I say, it is for the rider at the top of the GC leaderboard. And at the very start of the race, it can change pretty much every day. But as you get towards the latter stages of the race, you generally find that there are 1 or 2 riders that start pulling ahead in terms of lowest possible time, and it may only switch between the 2 of them. The general classification isn't the only race that's going on within the race though, but the yellow jersey is, as I say, the most recognisable and the most coveted. Wearing it is the dream of any rider that goes to the Tour de France. Unfortunately, due to the makeup of most teams, that isn't always possible for every rider. But again, more on that later. Now, the next jersey to talk about is the green jersey, and that's for the leader of the points classification, generally regarded as the sprinter's jersey. At the end of every stage, there are points to be awarded for the riders who cross the line in 1st, 2nd and 3rd. But on some of the less hilly or mountainous stages, you do get what's called an intermediate sprint somewhere in the middle of the stage. On these days that you'll find the sprint specialists from each team will push off up the road, leaving the main peloton or the main group of riders behind in order to get to the main intermediate sprint line first and take the points. When they do, you'll generally find that they immediately drop back to the peloton, or sometimes even getting spat out the back because they've given it their all just to get to the intermediate line. But to be honest, that is their day's work done. They have served their purpose for that stage, and they have more than deserved a rest going back to the finish line. But the person in overall lead, or with the most sprint points, gets the sprinter's green jersey. This is probably the most fashionable of jerseys in all of cycledom, is the polka dot jersey. It's given to to the very best climber, otherwise known as the Queen or King of the Mountain. Each time riders reach the top of a classified climb, they're awarded points. The steeper the climb, the bigger the reward, and the person with the most mountain climb points gets this incredible jersey. As an aside, you'll sometimes see, when watching the Tour de France on TV, spectators by the side of the road wearing polka dot t-shirts and caps, and these are given out by the Caravan, which is a huge procession of sponsorship vehicles that ride the route around about half an hour to an hour ahead of the main peloton. They throw out a hugely diverse range of merchandise, from cycling kit, bidons, sweets, and even fruit and veg sometimes. If it's a sponsor of the Tour de France, you bet your bottom dollar they're in the Caravan throwing out their goods. And honestly, it's one of the most fun and best spectacles of each stage of the Tour de France. And last, but by no means least, is the white jersey, which is awarded to the fastest rider under the age of 26. They are essentially the one to look out for in years to come. However, that said, it doesn't necessarily follow that a rider can't wear two jerseys at the same time. And certainly a few years ago, when Tadej Pogačar was dominating in the under 26 category, yeah, he was wearing the white and yellow jerseys at the same time, although not physically wearing them at the same time, because that would look a bit silly. But in those circumstances where any one rider is currently holding more than one jersey, the lesser of the two jerseys passes to the next rider in the leaderboard on that classification. So I remember in the last couple of years, Tadej Pogačar was actually wearing the yellow, the green and the polka dot jersey. And the polka dot jersey ended up passing to Jonas Vingegaard, who was second in the King of the Mountain classification, and the green sprinters jersey, I want to say, went to Jonathan Milan, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, there's nothing to say that one rider can't absolutely dominate the race and wear more than one jersey. Tadej Pogačar's done that quite a few times. This isn't just to have a little chat with their teammate or even one of their competitors. There's actually physics behind it, because by sitting in the group, in the bunch, and sitting behind a person in front who's taking all the wind, you can save up to 40% of your energy. 40% over 3 weeks, or even a week and a half for the women's tour, is absolutely massive. You'll often see riders deep in the peloton, not even pedaling at all, due to the negative air pressure that the whole group riding is creating. A lot of riders in the middle just get sucked along. They may not have to use any energy at all. And if you ever get dropped from the peloton, or that is to say, you end up falling out the back of it, you've got a hell of a job to chase and catch back up, because you'll be having to put out far more energy than the people in the peloton are. And that's why you'll often see a single rider, maybe even just 10 meters off the back of the main group, who's fighting for their life to get back to the peloton and having to put out a huge amount of watts just to catch up. The thing that people often find most confusing about the Tour de France is that it's not a full gas race for 6 hours a day, every single day, because that would be completely unsustainable. As I mentioned earlier, there are a number of different races going on at any one time. All teams will have what's called a team leader, and most usually the team leader will be going for the leaderboard on the general classification. But not all teams are the same, because some teams don't necessarily have a rider that can compete with the main GC contenders. Some smaller teams might just have, as I mentioned earlier, some sprint specialists or mountain specialists. And for even smaller teams still that don't have those, they might just go for individual stage wins. Now that might not sound like a lot, but a stage win can absolutely make a rider's career. A stage win at the Tour de France could mean a contract renewal with their team, or even getting signed by one of the bigger teams. Imagine it like an English FA Cup game where you've got someone like Man City playing, I don't know, Accrington Stanley, and a player from the lower league team plays an absolute blinder and scores an absolute screamer to win the game. You can bet your bottom dollar that the talent scouts from the bigger teams are going to be looking at that player more closely now. And it's the same in the Tour de France. Just a single Tour de France win can be an absolute game changer. But sometimes it's not even about winning the stage, because often you'll have a rider who has absolutely no chance of winning the stage going up the road in a breakaway. And the reason for it is to get more TV time for their sponsors. And I'm not even joking. Cycling is a very money heavy sport, and sponsors pay a pretty penny for getting their name on a jersey, and they love it when a rider goes out in front getting more TV time for their brand. The money involved is literally crazy. So when sponsors have paid that much to get their name on a jersey, they want to see it out front. And everyone in the peloton understands that, which is why you'll see a lone rider going up the road sometimes, and no one's really interested in racing to chase them down. So every stage is basically a game of chess played at 45 kilometers an hour. And sometimes everyone's working together, sometimes you'll get a small group out front, and other times you'll just get a lone rider. And sometimes still, absolutely nothing happens for 2 hours, and then all hell breaks loose at the very end. And that sort of explains breakaways as well, but to give it a little bit more context, you will sometimes see 5 to 8 riders go up the road hoping that they can work together to get to the end of the stage and sprint it out between themselves to win. Now, when I say working together, what I mean by that is they will all be drafting each other or sitting one behind the other, with one person sat at the front for a short period taking all the wind. They will then drop back and the next rider will go up, and in that way they can keep their average speed up and keep themselves well out in front of the peloton. But to be honest, when they first go up the road, the peloton aren't really that bothered. They'll let them go, they'll let them have their moment until it gets a little bit later on in the race, and every team will be telling their riders just how far ahead that breakaway is. And at one particular point they'll decide, okay, they're far enough away now, let's chase them down. And it becomes a very exciting cat and mouse game, effectively. Now, more often than not, the breakaway doesn't make it and they do get caught, sometimes most spectacularly just hundreds of meters before the finish line. But sometimes the absolute dream happens and riders make it to the finish line and sprint it out between themselves in their small group to see who's got the most energy left. Then there are the domestiques, and these are probably the coolest part of professional cycling, because as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of different specialists within teams, but not every one of them is trying to win, and that's where the domestique comes in. And these are the riders that are absolutely not expected to win any of the classifications or any of the stages. Their sole job is to help the team in any way that's needed. Now, for teams with a GC contender, that's usually helping them get to the finish line as fresh as possible. That could mean dropping back to the team cars, picking up some water, nutrition and other bits and pieces, and then slogging it back to the front to drop it off to the team leader so they don't have to waste energy. Or it could mean sitting out the front in the wind ahead of the team leader for hours on end, allowing the rider behind to save energy and keep out of the wind. And they've even been known to chase down attacks when the breakaway going up the road doesn't suit the team and there may be a rider in it that they want to pull back. So they'll go up, join the breakaway and try and disrupt it and slow it down as much as possible so the peloton can catch them back up. And they've even been known to give their bike to the team leader if anything happens to their one for any reason, a puncture, a mechanical, anything that the team car can't get to quickly. Now, although I say they're not expected to win, it does sometimes happen, and most notably in recent years is the case of Sepp Kuss, a domestique for Visma Lease bike team, who are one of the biggest teams in the world. During the Vuelta a España, Spain's answer to the Tour de France a couple of years ago, through some quirk of fate, he ended up wearing the red leaders jersey for a couple of stages. There were, it seems, a few internal wranglings in the team and a little bit of public discourse about why he wasn't being pushed to continue in the leader's jersey when the team clearly wanted Jonas Vingegaard, their actual team leader, to take over. Ultimately, it seems the team was swayed by public opinion, and Sepp Kuss, largely regarded as one of the nicest guys in the peloton, was able to keep the overall race leader's jersey and ended up winning the Vuelta a España. And when that happens, I have to say, it's absolutely incredible. Domestiques are very much the unsung heroes of the pro peloton. So it is nice to see them getting a little bit of a reward every now and then. And then finally, we have probably the funnest part of the tour, the mountains. This is where it all gets a little bit crazy, because gravity doesn't care how aerodynamic your bike is, and no matter how light or strong you are, you're never going to go uphill as fast as you are on the flat. And that's why you'll often see fans camped out by the side of the road on these mountain climbs, because that's where the riders are going slowest and they get the longest view of them. And if you ever go to a mountain stage, be prepared. It can get manic. Huge crowds just inches from the riders as they pass. Flags being waved in the air. Flares, unfortunately, sometimes going off as well, which can be an absolute nightmare when you're blowing out your backside up a hill. And although it's frowned upon, sometimes you'll even get spectators running alongside the riders as they're pushing up the hills. And honestly, I think this is the best part of pro cycling. No other sport could you get as close to your sporting heroes as you can in cycling. It's loud, it's crazy, it's frenetic, it is an absolute cacophony of noise, and it is the very best part of cycling. Well, if this is going to be your very first Tour de France, I would forget trying to memorise every rider's name, because there's a good 180 of them. Instead, look out for these 5 things. Who's in yellow? How much time do they have? Is there a breakaway? When does the final climb start? And who still has teammates left? Because that last one might be the difference between getting to the finish line lovely and fresh for a sprint or having absolutely no energy left. Once you understand those 5 things, pretty much the whole race starts to make sense. And so that is the basics of the Tour de France. And so now when your mate says, why aren't they chasing that rider up the road? You can confidently answer. And if you like this video, then you might enjoy a mini documentary video I made a couple of weeks ago about one of the most tragic stages of the Tour de France in 1967, which I'll link here somewhere. But otherwise, thanks very much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.